In times like these. So we've been talking about contemplative, compassionate service, and this is the third part of that today. We're focusing in episode 4 on service. Service in times like these might look very different than it used to just a few days or weeks ago, when we could go out and do anything we wanted with anyone we wanted, help in any way. We really can hardly fly to get somewhere. We really are encouraged to not even be with other people right now. So it's a very challenging time to understand what service can look like. But in our series, Contemplative, Compassionate Service is not just outward acts of altruism in person. There's so many ways, as you know, to serve each other in these times. Many of you are doing that already by initiating new ways of connecting. I just had a friend who I haven't spoken to for several years send me a message earlier just saying, hey, I'm thinking about you. I'm over here in this part of the world. Just want you to know you people in New Orleans are in our hearts. And so there's just a lot of ways, obviously, we can be still engaged in active service. But in this day and time, especially, seeing that service is grounded in contemplation, so being very present to the source of love, and then experiencing compassion inside our beings before we seek to give that out into the world in acts of service, is a really important way to be grounded contemplatives serving in forms of sacred activism in these times. So just a quick reminder, in this series, when we talk about contemplation, we're talking about ways of practicing the presence of God or sourcing ourselves in the presence of love. And so tuning in to that sense of inner sourcing is a very important part of this process. It's a way that we don't burn ourselves out, especially with all the extra stress and anxiety of these times. So I'm Dr. William Thiele, and I've introduced myself in other parts of the episodes leading up to now. But in our School for Contemplative Living for decades now, we've been seeking people that participate in our school to ground ourselves in that contemplative practice that fills us with compassion and calls us out into the world in acts of service. In this particular moment, I want to remind us that compassion, the middle piece of that, is being aware of suffering, feeling empathy or connection with others in their suffering, actually in self-compassion even with our own, and then finding the wish and willingness in ourselves to help relieve that suffering. Service then becomes just a natural outflow of that inner experience of compassion, and service really turns into or translates into sacred activism when compassion is really set free to be expressed as altruism. In this sense, contemplation filling us, bringing that compassion to full inside us, turning into then ways of serving the world in times like these, perhaps in ways that you've never served before, or going back and renewing ways that you used to serve. But now this is the way in these days when we're not quite as much connected to each other in person all the time. So just like sap fills trees from the roots up, and then that filling comes from the trunk up into the branches and ends up flowering out, contemplative practice fills us with compassion. As we become full in our own being, that flowers out into sacred activism, ways of serving in this world. I also want to remind us as we begin this way that this is an important time for us not to lose the sense of fulfillment for our own sakes that serving brings. Since active compassion that connects with other people is one of the best ways to bring about our own happiness, even though that's not really our goal, it's a kind of byproduct. But in this business of pulling apart from each other and not being in each other's presence so much, this is a very important time to be experimental, to keep looking for next ways that we can all communicate, connect, stay part of our sense of community with each other, and experience the fulfillment of serving each other perhaps in new ways that we've never done before. So I just encourage you in your own practice of contemplation, in your own sourcing in that great source of love, that this is a time to let this spirit of creativity move us all into better ways for these days of serving in the world that don't risk the health of someone else or ourselves. We might even imagine at this point that the exact same healing energy that has flowed into us in the past through contemplative practices is doing exactly what it's always done. It's just helping us look and find new ways, new places to let that be expressed in the world. Some acts of service are visible, like I get some food and I drop it off at someone's house. Some acts of service are invisible, like being a silent witness and presence who really tunes in to the needs of others, which we can do obviously in these days by phone, by Skype or Zoom, FaceTime with your iPhone, even just the regular ways of old time writing letters to each other or sending cards or notes. This is a day when we're not as inhibited as we might think from really expressing our presence with others, even if not always in physical proximity to each other. So I just encourage you to remember that there are a wide variety of ways to serve, some more obviously outward and some from within. And we're going to practice with that as our practice for today. In whatever form of service that you feel led to do in these days, I just want to invite you to be sure that you're not letting yourself feel the gap or absence or sense of inefficacy, which is really pseudo ineffectiveness, a feeling that says, I can't really do anything to help others right now, I just have to think about myself. Not really a good way to live, obviously, in these days, and just not true. The reality is that could stifle our attempts to stay connected and reach out and serve each other at a time when we most need it. Both others need our service, and we need the opportunity to serve the world in our own unique ways. So let me just encourage you, when you catch that feeling or thought of like, there's really nothing I can do with others in these times, as quickly as you can to dispel the myth, catch it, release it, and come back to the real truth that there are a million ways we can serve each other right now, perhaps just not as outwardly as we had been in the same ways as before. So I want to suggest a practice that you could do if you happen to be with another person right now, or you could make a plan to do this with another person, family member, a friend. We all can still be in contact, even physical contact with each other in these days, but with a bit of more space, obviously, than we used to have. So at least 6, maybe even 8 or 10 feet apart. But still, we have ways to listen to each other. And the exercise I'm going to lead us through next is one that you could do on the phone, one that you could do with one of those other mediums like Skype or Zoom, but an active practice of service in a particular way that is contemplative, compassionate service. So here's what I want to suggest, whether you did it right now or you do it later when you pair up with another person, that you try this. Pick one of the two of you that is willing to share first, and the other person be willing to just be a silent witness. So a listener, listening with open heart and open mind, non-judgmentally, perhaps even being curious about what it's like for the one who's sharing to be themselves right now and going through this experience, but not speaking. Not in this exercise, not trying to for sure give advice or fix a situation. But this is what I'm inviting us to do, to let the sharer go first, one person first while the other listens. And the sharer start with something I regret in my life. So a time when my behavior was not skillful and I wish it would have been, to feel the remorse that we feel when we've had times that we remember that we didn't act in ways that we wish we would have, or our better selves would prefer to act and live. While that person takes 2 minutes just briefly to share a moment like that, an experience, which could be this week has happened, or it could be from 20 years ago. but just remembering something I regret. I wish I would have done this differently. So the first person shares, the other person just listens, wide-hearted, like really, truly open-hearted, feeling compassion and love for the one without saying a word. No input, no, oh yeah, let me tell about me, and I had an experience like that. Just strictly being all ears and heart, if you will, bringing the heart into the ears, into our way of listening. So to engage in that way for about 2 minutes in any of these mediums, phone, online, in whatever way is best for you, and then to pause, both of you, and just give a moment to discern, what am I feeling right now? What is this experience of speaking of my regret or listening? And then after a moment of pause, changing places and letting the one who was the listener be now the speaker, who engages in a simple, brief, 2-minute long, this is something I feel remorse for or regret for an unskillful behavior in my life that I wish I could do more skillfully. Same thing again. The other one who was speaking before now becomes the silent witness, to listen with all your heart as best you can. When that time is done, I invite you to change directions again and let the first speaker speak again. And this time for the first speaker to share something that you appreciate about yourself. Not everybody can do this easily. Some people think that's being self-centered, but why can we not appreciate things about ourselves? Like actually look in and see things, traits of ours, characteristics of ours, behaviors we've done, that the opposite of remorse, we're really grateful for this part of ourselves and how we live our lives in the world. So it could be anything. But the first speaker will go first again and share, here's something I appreciate about myself for a few moments. And it could be several things. You may have 5 or 10 things that come to mind that are things about you that you just like, while the other person, again, just listens as a heartfelt, silent witness. And after a minute or two of that, pausing again to notice what each person is feeling as the speaker or the listener to that appreciation, and then flipping. So the other person is now the one who shares some form of self-appreciation. When that time is done, I invite you to pause one more time to notice what you're each feeling, and finally to take turns saying to each other, this is what that was like for me, whether being the speaker of a remorse or an appreciation, or the listener of a remorse or an appreciation. A simple but beautiful way for us to serve each other in times like these. Finally, if you want to do this, after this YouTube has been posted, I'd love to hear your comments about what you discovered in that experience and what it was like for you. Continuing to listen to this series, I'll come back again with some responses to the theme of gentle and fierce forms of self-compassion in the next episode.